Hey everybody, Professor Carafit coming to you from the biology bunker. Uh, hope all is well where you're at. Hey, I'll show you what I built this week. A tenor cigar box guitar. It's kind of nice. Anyway, so we have been talking about evolution of organisms, where they came from. Bio 1, we started with molecules, right? But we moved all the way up to organisms, organ systems, evolution. Now we're looking at populations and how they interact with biotic and abiotic factors. So how they interact, what they eat, how they react when the weather changes, things like that. That's what ecology essentially. So a few learning goals for this lecture and the upcoming lectures. Describe population size and density. So how would you describe those? Three different patterns of population distribution. Life tables. So look at life tables and basically interpret what they mean is what my ultimate goal is there. Describe the three types of survivorship curves and relate them to actual population. Okay, so what is ecology? As I kind of alluded to a second ago, it's the interaction of organisms with each other and their environment. So biotic factors are the interaction of organisms with other living things. That's an important definition. You might want to write that down. So biotic factors are living things that might influence a population. Abiotic factors are non-living things that influence a population. That's going to be things like rainfall, minerals that are available in the soil, climate, asteroid impact, right? Those are abiotic factors. So the little bullet points down here are just some thought questions. What environmental factors limit the geographic distribution of a species? That's something someone might ask. Hey, here's a species and it only lives in this area. Why is that? What biotic and abiotic factors make this population stay in this one spot? How do interactions with other species affect this population? And when you look at interactions of other species, then we get into community ecology. This lecture here for this week is going to focus on population ecology. That's the ecology of a population. We'll move on to bigger picture ecology. So when we talk about ecology, it can span the gamut of biology. So organismal ecology is the most narrow type of ecology. That's what does this organism eat? You might follow around a single flamingo, right, and see what it eats, when it breeds, where it goes when it migrates. But then you can look at a population. Remember, a population is a group of the same species in an area, right? So population ecology is the study of a population. You might look at whether it's evolving using Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. You might look at where they go when they migrate, what they eat, things like that. How many of them there are, how fast they reproduce, how many of them get eaten every year. That's the kind of things you would study as a population ecologist. Community ecology looks at the interactions of many species. Then you go up to a higher level to ecosystem ecology. That's like an ecosystem might be like Lake Conway or UCA campus. Okay, then you go up even taller, higher up. I'm thinking like Google Earth, zooming out. Landscape ecology would be even broader, like the Ozark Mountains, or the Great Plains, or the Saharan Desert. You move out even further to the global ecology. So you're studying the globe, you're studying climate change, you're studying how massive, large scale changes occur on the planet that are biotic and abiotic in nature. So population ecology. What is a population? I think you know that. Make sure you can define that. What traits would we want to know about a population? So you are a scientist sent to study some penguins. You might ask yourself a few questions. Hey, what do these penguins eat? When do they mate? What eats the penguins? How many babies do they have when they do mate? These are different questions you might ask. How dense is the population of penguins? So the things you might ask. Now I want to show you some symbols on this page and a few other things. So one thing you might ask is what do they eat? Where do they live? What's their habitat? What's their population size? I want to show you this symbol right there, N. Remember when we did figure captions, we would put a small n. Excuse me. So n equals whatever. That small n means sample size. Like if you were studying this penguin population, okay, and you followed 10 penguins. The sample size would be 10, lowercase n. Capital N stands for the entire population. That's the symbol for the whole population, capital N. Okay? So when we study little samples of a population, we're trying to infer what the whole population is like, but usually we can't study an entire population. We can only study samples to understand the population. We might look at density. So how many penguins are there per hectare? So that's what density is number per unit of area. We might look at the birth rate and the death rate. So a lot of these things that are essentially what we call demographics, the study of the traits of that population. So one thing we might be able to infer by studying a population is how the population is distributed. And populations tend to be distributed in one of three ways, although you can kind of get hybrids of the different ways, of course. But organisms can be clumped, like we see in this starfish population. You can see this little map here kind of shows you how they're distributed. They're found clumped. And you're going to find organisms clumped like that around important resources a lot of the time. So maybe there's food or shelter found in different spots, like my hand gestures here. And they're found clumped in those areas. Now, a uniform distribution like these penguins, they're found spread out pretty much equally in an area. So perhaps resources are spread out, perhaps that helps them to avoid getting in fights. You know, there will be reasons for that. You might study why are they clumped this way, but they could be uniformly clumped. Or you might find, like this field of flowers, that they're randomly clumped. There is no pattern to it. It's just where seeds happen to land and grow. So you might be clumped around a resource. You might be distributed somewhat equally. In this case, the penguins distribute pretty equally apart, so they avoid fights. They each have their little patch of territory. Or organisms might be randomly clumped, and you could figure that out. So, like I said, you could study population density, which is the number of organisms per unit of area. So here we have caribou, and you can see that there's a lot of them per acre or per hectare, right? So let's say, you know, this would be like a ratio. It would be, I'll put H for hectare, which is, you know, the metric kind of equivalent of an acre, right? I'm just going to put a letter H. I'm drawing with a mouse. I didn't plug in my pen today. And then let's say there's like let's just say 1,000. And I'm trying to draw with my mouse. This is going to be fun. 1,000. So yes, okay. 1,000 per hectare, right? That would be the population density. That's important to know because that's going to affect how much they're polluting their environment with feces and how much food they're eating and things like that. So the study of demographics is really one of the major things you're doing as a population biologist. So demography is the study of births, deaths, migration in a population over time. So how much is that population growing or shrinking over time? And this is going to be really important if you go into conservation biology and you're trying to save an endangered species, for example. This is vital information. And what you can do is you can record all these numbers and you can record them in what they call a life table. You can see here a life table is a age-specific summary of survival and reproductive rates in a population. So how likely is the organism to survive? So, okay, what's the chances it survives being born? What's the chances it survives being a child? What's the chances it grows up to be an adult? How many babies is it going to have? These sorts of things. Life tables are usually made by following a cohort. So a cohort is a group of individuals of the same age. Okay, so you follow a group that was born at the same time and you track how many babies they have, how long they live, and things like that. Okay, and they often ignore males because females are the only ones that actually produce offspring. Here's an example of a life table. We have, in this case, some ground squirrels, ages 0 to 10 years of age. You can see when the first ones were born, there were 653 born. At the end of 10 years, only one of that cohort was still alive. So you can get an idea of how long these things live. They have the proportion alive from year to year. So 100% or one, a proportion of one alive at the beginning, look how many died by by the time the next year rolled around. The number that were still alive was only about 38%, right? And so you can see how quickly they succumb to predators and things or disease year after year. And they have the death rate. And then the other thing they have is the average number of female offspring born per female. And you can see that each one of these things. So you can get an idea of how many babies each one of these ground squirrels is having. And that will give you an idea of how much the population can grow. So these are all different bits of data you might have on one of these life tables. Then from that life table, you can look at more specific things. One of the things you might look at or build from that life table is a survivorship curve. And these are the proportion of the population still alive at different parts of the lifespan of that organism. Okay? And they usually fall, well, they can fall into one of three categories, but of course, most species are really somewhere between these three categories. These are, human-made ideas, but we can see that organisms fall either onto one of these categories or somewhere between them. So a type 1 curve, survivorship curve, you can read it here. Low death rates during early and middle life and an increase in death rates among well, you can go back to that and view that. I accidentally moved on to the next slide. But you can read it. This is a visualization of the text on the previous slide. So have a look. Human beings have a growth curve called a type 1 curve. So what does that mean? It means that at least in most of the world, human beings have a long lifespan, and then we die in old age. So have a look at what this graph is showing. On the x-axis, we have percentage of maximum lifespan. Okay, so 0 is birth, 100 is the longest anyone could possibly live. And then on the other axis is number of survivors. Okay, so we have everyone alive at birth, and in most of the world where there's modern medicine and things, if you are born alive, there's a good chance you'll live to be an adult. But as you can see, as we approach getting older here, more and more of us die until everyone is dead at a certain point. Now, a type 2 curve is a lifespan curve where everyone in the population has an equal chance of dying at all points of their life, like this ground squirrel. If you're born, you might be eaten. When you're older, you might be eaten or get a disease. When you're old, you might be eaten or get a disease. It's equally possible. And so everyone in the population has about the same chance of being eaten or dying of something. So that's a type 2 curve. A type 3 curve we can see here in oysters. And I kind of think that maybe sea turtles show this curve too. Meaning a whole bunch of babies are produced, but most of them die rather quickly. So oysters might release thousands or maybe even millions of eggs, right? And they get fertilized, and then most of them are eaten by fish or die. Okay? Very rapid death. A lot are born, but a lot die very rapidly. And the ones that survive, though, have a really high chance of surviving all the way till adulthood. That's a type 3 curve. So you're studying that when you're studying demographics. You're looking at why populations are growing or shrinking and reasons why a population might change. For example, births. The number of births are going to increase the population size. The number of deaths are going to decrease the population size. Okay? Immigration with an I. Immigration is going to be birds coming into a population, increasing its size. So that's like gene flow, right? Immigration. And then emigration with an E are birds leaving. So think of E like exit, emigration, or when birds leave a population. So the population is going to change due to births and immigration, and it's going to shrink due to deaths and emigration. These are all things you might study as a population biologist. So we're going to pick up on that and continue in the next video.